Maybe. Welcome to 1530. This is episode 13. So today we're going to be talking about the tour and who won Indian Wells. Kind of recap that, as well as Miami. We had two pretty amazing Masters 1000s tournaments to close out, I guess, the hardcourt season. And then we're moving into clay. So we'll talk about how the tour's doing. We're also going to be talking about an interesting topic today about head-to-head effects and what effects that has on win probabilities. But my name is Ben.
I'm Matt, and we're just two tennis fans, so opposite sides of America, just bringing stats to the tennis world.
All right, so let's kick it off with the stat of the day. So stat of the day is 3 points on serve. And this is in the Miami final. Roger Federer only dropped 3 points on serve. He was 32 for 35. This is his best ever mark in a final. And actually tied his career best for serve points won. So as you would imagine, 100% of those were first serve points that he won. So 3 points were he lost on second serve. And obviously we know Isner was hobbled, unfortunately, with his foot injury. But regardless, this is still an incredible feat. And if it sounds very impressive, it definitely should be, because this doesn't happen very often. So very good serving day from Fed. Obviously a little bit of a down day for Isner. But
it is also Isner. We're going to talk about head-to-head matchups.
Yeah.
It's just not the best at returning, so that probably didn't either.
No,
but still,
it did.
Dropping only 3 points is that's hard to do against anybody.
It is. It's amazing. And like you're saying, head-to-head effects, obviously Isner, even though he usually gets into some tie breaks against Fed, he's only lost, I believe, twice to Federer. Once in Paris on an indoor court, and then the other time was a Davis Cup clay match. All the other times Federer seems to have his number, and he definitely had his number in Miami on that Sunday. But yeah, so we'll just kind of get you guys up to speed on what's going on the ATP World Tour. So Dominic Thiem, amazing run to the final at Indian Wells. He was definitely not favored against the, I believe, 4-time champion Roger Federer. Fed lost again in the 3-set final in Indian Wells, second year in the row. He lost to Del Potro, had match points the previous year. So I think bummer for Fed, but obviously a huge breakthrough for Dominic Thiem. That's it. That is his maiden Masters 1000s title. So any comments on that, Matt, and on Thiem's kind of resurgence?
Well, I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that was his first Masters 1000. No, I mean, I think he's been out of the limelight for a while now, which is probably good for any player to not have the spotlights on you. So just kind of go to work and do your thing, and it's great to see him with the win, and hopefully he can carry that on and see what happens.
Yeah, totally. I think for me, because like you're saying, he's been a very good player, especially on clay, making the French Open final and beating Rafa in I believe it was Madrid or elsewhere. So it is surprising that he hasn't had the same success. To me, it shows that he can be good on any surface.
True.
The way he was powering from the baseline, because I think he's disappointed at some of the hardcourt events, but there he showed that no, he has the mental capacity. He was passing Federer. He was just coming up with the big shots, and I think Federer didn't really have answers for him, to be honest, from the baseline. So it was great for Thiem. I think it was one of those matches where he just got really hot throughout the tournament, but still very impressive from Thiem.
For sure. Well, it probably helps that he because Joke got knocked out before they met, right? I don't think.
Yes, Joke lost to somebody else.
Yeah.
He lost to that's right, Philippe Kohlschreiber.
That's right. So that probably helps a little bit. But I mean, needless to say, he still had to win the matches he had to win. And had to beat Monfils, who was playing well. And maybe I'm looking at a different round. No, I think that's right.
No, I think he had to beat Monfils. But like Shane, he still had to come up with the goods. He had a couple tight matches, but he won them. So it's amazing.
That's great.
What was I going to say? I guess like you're saying, speaking of players getting hot, right? Like Nick Kyrgios just came off the Acapulco win, and he lost in the second round. I was there watching it to Philippe Kohlschreiber, 6-4, 6-4. So Kohlschreiber got hot, and then he did the same thing to Djokovic, same scoreline, 6-4, 6-4, which beating anybody of that caliber, Kyrgios or Djokovic, is amazing, but especially Djokovic. It's crazy that he's able to yeah, he was able to beat him so handily. But again, it's head-to-head matchups we'll talk about. Again, it's just someone getting streaky. You know, Kohlschreiber was serving really well. He's a shorter guy, but he defends the serve actually pretty well. And he was able to put Novak on his back foot, even though Novak was kind of playing tentative. So yeah, that's just how it goes in tennis sometimes.
Yeah. Well, in that match was rain delayed. I think I watched like the one game that was played before the rain delay that put it to the next day, and I don't know. I mean, Joe looked in normal self. Obviously, it was a small sample, just like a game and a half, but it looks like it was going to be a normal day for him. And yeah, Kohlschreiber came out the next day and just put it all to rest.
Yeah,
put it away. So
yeah. And then I did. Yeah, totally. And I did confirm because I was like, did Thiem win a clay court Masters 1000? He did not. He lost to Rafa in the Madrid final, and then he beat Rafa a few weeks later in Rome, which I think is where I was getting there. So this is his first Masters 1000 event, which is incredible. He, you know, because some people say, his window's kind of passed, but yeah, totally not. He's playing some good tennis on the hard court, and even the U.S. Open, right? This last year against Rafa had some very close points there, tiebreaker in the fifth, couldn't get it done. So I think he is a force to be reckoned with. He's not just a single surface player. Yeah, but he just reminds me so much of Rafa.
I agree.
Spin and game style.
Yeah. And I go back, I guess this isn't stats based, but I feel like one of the reasons the Big Four have been so good is their consistency. And so Thiem is playing at a high level. If he can do that consistently, then he'll get to the point where he's breaking through, where he's getting to the finals, where he's converting those final matches, consolidating them, and getting those championships. So I think he'll come through if he can maintain consistency. I think that's just the key is
exactly
steady increase, even if the steps are small. If you're steadily getting better, steadily at least staying consistent, then you'll get places in the tennis world.
Yep. No, totally. And that's, I think, the number one way I think he reminds me of Nadal, just watching him point in and point out. He just has that focus for every point, and he's mentally tough, and he fights hard. Rafa, I think, is the ultimate competitor that way, that every point he's in it. And I think that's how Thiem is. We'll see. I think on the return game, he still has some work to do, but I think he has that potential to be a really amazing returner and baseliner, like he showed against Fed.
Yeah, agreed.
But yeah, but pretty fun there. And then obviously it shows, right? The next in Miami, he lost first round, kind of the hangover from that championship. And that was interesting, that the new venue in Miami, Federer really struggling at the start of the tournament, but then Novak lost and he got his mojo going, started beating people like Shapovalov, who's an amazing next-gen player that I think I was hoping the match would be a little closer, but Federer completely destroyed him. And yeah, Federer really got better as that tournament went on. So that was pretty amazing.
Agreed.
And I guess back to next gen. So there was him, and then as well as his other compatriot from Canada. The name is slipping right now, but he's the young French Canadian. And they kind of have that rivalry, him and Shapovalov. So two guys in the semifinals, neither of them able to win because familiar names were in the final, Isner and Fed.
Yeah. Auger Aliassime.
Thank you. Yes, and he's the one that beat Tsitsipas first round or second round of Indian Wells.
He did, yeah.
Yeah.
Took out Tiafoe too, who had a good. What was that? Was that the Australian Open that he?
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
Broke out a little bit. So
yeah. So some young players. Canada is pretty crazy because even Raonic did pretty well. He lost really in a really close match to Thiem. So it seemed like it was all Canadians between a little bit of Indian Wells and then Miami, two semifinalists. So Canadian tennis, good work.
They're doing something up there.
Yeah. All right. Well, transition a little bit. I know a lot of times we talk a little bit more stats with the current matches, but we wanted to spend some time today talking about head-to-head effects and what that does to win probability. I don't know if any of you guys, any of our listeners are watching March Madness or got to see some of those fun games, but a big thing that's fun to watch is the win probabilities, especially in-game probabilities, where you can see, oh, this team's down 3 with less than a minute, like Virginia last night. You're like, oh yeah, they only have like a 30% chance to win, and then they made the 3 and were able to force overtime. So I think this concept of win probabilities, and especially with the head-to-head against the opponent, is a very interesting concept. But Matt, do you want to talk about some of the concepts with that, with head-to-head?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, long story short, spoiler alert, there's not really a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right in saying that?
Yeah.
There's not a huge impact. Um, yeah, I mean, I'll let you go through. Yeah, there's an article that you found, Ben. Um, uh, Apparently a statistician, and goes through and puts a couple models together and looks at the impacts of head to head. The first thing he talks about is that head to head matchups in the tennis world, especially, um, yeah, I guess in the tennis world, are just not as common as you might think they would be. I think the first thing that stuck out to me was that there's like a 0.1% chance that you have a head-to-head matchup more than 3 times with a specific player.
Uh-huh.
And so from the get-go, you can talk about, oh, well, maybe head-to-head, plays an impact in the win probability for these different players. But in reality, it doesn't happen as often as we might imagine it would. And because of that, we don't have a huge sample size for it to have any sort of major effect. So it's hard to impact probabilities with such a small sample size.
Exactly. And I was reading another article that kind of talked about that he based his model on not head to head, but on common opponents. So kind of this transitive property thing, right? Well, if Federer beat Thiem and Nadal beat Federer, well, then Nadal should be able to beat Thiem. We know that obviously doesn't always hold up because there is the head-to-head effects, there is matchups, there is surfaces, but that's how models kind of have to work, like you're saying, because most players don't have even more than 3 matches against the same player in a 10-year period. Of course, there's huge exceptions to that, right? Djokovic and Nadal have met 53 times, which is an open era record. Of course, Djokovic narrowly kind of taking the lead on that 28-25. But like you're saying, most players don't have 53. They barely even have 3. And I think I was thinking about that. I was like, oh, is that really true? I feel like these same guys are always playing each other. But if you think about with the new generation that's always trying to push through, you have older players that leave for one reason or another, or they're not as good anymore. Like maybe Ferrer comes to mind where they're losing in earlier and earlier rounds. So they're not seeing the same top guys. You think about injuries, right? Like injuries can put you out. I mean, even Federer, the rest of 2016, he wasn't able to face Nadal and increase that head to head. So you think about all these different variables, especially like I'm saying, it's not the same top 10 or even the same top 100. It's very fluid. It changes, I think, more than we would think. And so right there, I'm like, okay, now I could see maybe where they're coming from, that it is hard to play against the same person more than 3 times, unless you're one of these top guys that's always making the final and you're always drawn against Fed Nadal or Djokovic Nadal, as we've seen a lot. So that actually was kind of eye-opening to me, I think. I want to talk about as well. Yeah, I guess just the classic matchup where you have commentators saying, oh, well, it's clearly a head-to-head problem. You think of Federer and Nadal. You're like, oh, Federer, especially on clay, Nadal is just going to, use his forehand to kick it up to Fed's backhand, that heavy topspin. Fed's not going to be able to be in the rallies. He's already at a disadvantage. And it's quick to remark that it's true, that I don't think that is a wrong fact to say. And you look at the head-to-head, it's 23-15, but I think Fed's won the last 6, including the walkover in Indian Wells. So you take away those recent success he's had, changing his backhand, that's a pretty, dominating head-to-head. Of course, I would say, as a Fed fan, clay matchups skew the head-to-head because this effect of the topspin is greater, plus 15 out of their 38 matches, have been played on clay. So there's clearly that, but I think this the stylistic, maybe like we're saying, oversimplification is used by commentators a lot. And I think it is kind of fun for the fans to have contrast in styles and to say, oh, well, this style is just better against this style. But then that same style doesn't work against a two-hander like Djokovic. So again, you hear this a lot in the commentators, but what we're saying is maybe it works for the top guys, but for overall, for statistical modeling, it's not that good of a model. It doesn't make that big of a difference, like you're saying.
Yeah. And I mean, I would go back and draw that connection that you were just talking about with the NCAA men's basketball tournament. I mean, there's a reason that nobody's had a perfect bracket. If, everybody can sit down and say, oh, well, UVA matches up as a number 1 seed best, super well against this number 16 seed UMBC. That's never, that upset has never happened. And look what happens, it's, you get different teams, or in tennis, different players who start streaking at different times or in different tournaments. And in reality, every tennis tournament is just a mini March Madness bracket.
Yeah.
You never know. You never know what happens when they get on the court. That's why they play the game.
Right. And even though it's best of 5 sets, it's not like they're playing best out of 5 matches over 5 days, in which case would even more heavily favor the best player. And that's why kind of Masters events are fun, because a guy like Kohlschreiber can take 2 quick sets off Djokovic, and you're like, whoa, what happened? If Djokovic, had been given that extra set, I guess, to get back into it, you never know what happens. So that is interesting. I guess what's interesting as well is just not only head-to-head who has the advantage, but also based on ELO, right, and the separation, the differential in point value, you're able to be like, okay, well, 50 difference in points would be whatever, they should win it 80% of the time, or what have you. But then looking at the head-to-head, for some people, Stan Wawrinka, we'll talk about in a minute, is one where it actually has skewed quite a bit for him. Like we said, most players, it's there's a little bit there if they even have a history, but for Wawrinka, for example, on the graph from this On the Tee article showed that against Berdych, Tomas Berdych always had, so in their last 10 matches, his ELO was higher than Stan's, so it was pretty close. But Stan's only lost 1 match since 2010, and he's won 10 of those. So hugely skewed. The probability should say majority of the time, even though they're very close, Berdych should be winning, but that's just not been the case. I know a lot of those matches have really been close, 4-setters and slams, pretty close, but maybe there's just something there. Maybe ELO didn't fully reflect, or maybe there is a matchup with Berdych. So yeah, it's super interesting. One moment. Okay, thanks. Yeah, so I was talking about Berdych and Stan. Yeah, just super interesting that though ELO predicts Berdych should win X% of the time, Wawrinka is totally flipped that around. And so that's a huge extreme. On the graph, that's like the one big extreme with him. And Cilic was very similar as well. Stan's won the most recent 8 matches, even though Cilic, he's not only won a slam, but he's been pretty consistent in the slams recently. So his rise in ELO did not coordinate with more match wins over Wawrinka. So Wawrinka may be an interesting case here.
That he is. Yep.
Yeah.
That's the one place where it has a somewhat legitimate effect.
Yeah,
for sure.
I guess the other one too is thinking about, Indian Wells. I'm like, ooh, Stan just won that really tense match over Fucsovics, and like maybe this is going to be really good against Federer. Now Federer beat him pretty routinely. But again, looking at head-to-head, right, even though the ELO would say one thing, of course, ELO doesn't take into account injuries as well as it should. And that's something we've talked about. But also just him playing against his compadre. I think there's a mental aspect, right? Fed knows, and he said this before. He's like, I know what shots Stan's going to hit, and he knows what shots I'm going to hit. But that's the thing is trying to neutralize that, I guess, even though you know what the other guy knows. It's just the mind game right there. But, Federer has a 22-3 head-to-head over Stan, and all 3 victories for Stan have come on a clay court. So he's never beaten Federer, even though he had a really close Australian Open a couple years ago in the semis. He's never beaten him on a hard court. So I think mentally that's just such a huge advantage. Stan knows, I've never beaten Fed on a hard court. And Fed knows, yeah, I can beat him on hard court. So I don't know if there's that, but that's got to play a factor. Even though maybe the probability models don't show that especially for those 2 guys, all right, Fed's got the edge. Clay, totally different story, but
sure.
Hard court, you got to favor Fed a little bit more than what ELO would say.
And I think it also comes down to execution, right? You might know what the other person's going to do, but if you can't keep them from doing it or return with a more precise or more crisp shot, then it doesn't matter if you know or not.
Yeah.
And that's only going to hurt your mental game.
Yeah,
knowing what they're going to do and then watching them do it to you. And
that's very well said.
Execution.
It was funny even watching that Indian Wells match, certain things that Stan tried to do, whether it was lobs or different things, and after Fed put away the overhead or the volley, you could see Stan getting frustrated. Like you're saying, he knew that was coming. He just didn't pull off the lob as well as he should or whatnot. So, yeah, tennis is a tricky game, especially with trying to execute that game plan. The margin of error is pretty slim.
Yep. It's a game of inches.
It is. It truly is a game of inches. So yeah, that's something we thought was pretty interesting. Hopefully we can talk more about these probabilities and other things that impact them, because I think it's pretty fascinating. As well as talking about, I don't know if there is some predictive power in that, and with the Grand Slams, if there are some better models. But it was interesting to reading about the different models, and they really are just slight differences, but most of the models did have that common opponent theory. So that's something hopefully we can talk about in the future. I think what else I had. Or we can also, like, we're starting to get into the clay court season, so entertaining questions such as, we know Nadal is probably the greatest clay courter of all time, but who's maybe the next best? I know maybe Djokovic or Federer could have an argument for that, or Bjorn Borg. So it'd be interesting to look into the stats. So that's hopefully something we can come up with, as well as we love talking about the young new players in the sport and hopefully looking at their stats, seeing if they're improving. Tsitsipas, he did play a little bit better in Miami, but it would be interesting to see how he does going to the clay court season, because he's a pretty good clay courter as well. But Matt, any last words?
I think that's everything.
All right.
Lots of good material coming up, and stay with us. Stay tuned.
That's right. And we'll see you guys on the court.